Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, and I am a talker, so I got to start on time. Hope everyone is doing good this morning. I think they're still kind of coming in here, but we're going to go ahead and start. So how many of us know that God can speak to us through dreams? God can speak to us through dreams. Anybody? Does God speak to you through dreams? He does me. So all people dream at night during what is known as REM. Does everybody know what that is? Rapid eye movement. Sleep. Though some don't remember many of their dreams. I found this interesting. The best studies indicate that dreams originate in the brain stem, but the prefrontal cortex, or the part of the brain associated with higher level of reasoning, is not active when we sleep. So we're not reasoning when we sleep. I thought that was interesting. That's why some dreams are so strange to us. Anybody have any weird dreams where they're flying through the air? That's typically, I dream all the time I'm flying like I'm a trapeze artist. I have no idea why I dream that. Anybody, any wives in here have any dreams like their husband did something wrong and you wake up mad at them? Right? And you're like, I can't believe. And he's like, I didn't do anything. You're not reasoning. So there's, that would be the part where we have to know that that's, just a crazy dream, right? So for this very reason, it is profoundly dangerous to ascribe spiritual significance to every dream that one has. So we should be able to know, those of you that said God does talk to you through dreams, we should be able to know the difference between a God dream and a I watch Dateline dream, that kind of thing. So many are merely a biological and physiological response to various life stimuli having no connection or import to our walk with God. So contrarily, we find multiple examples in the scriptures of God using dreams to speak to people. In fact, this method is specifically promised to us as members of the New Testament church. But this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And that's in Acts 2:16 through 17. So again, we should be able to know the difference. We're going to talk about Solomon. We're on the series of David and Solomon. And so the topic today is when God appeared to Solomon in a dream, and he asked him, what can I give you? And he asked for wisdom. So little funny backstory. I had told every time I get up here, I cry. I've got my tissue just in case. But I was like, you know what? This lesson, when I saw the lesson I was assigned to, I was like, this isn't going to make me cry. Solomon kind of bothers me a little bit. I'm going to be honest with you. He bothers me. And I'm like, I'm going to have to really dig into this, because when you read about what Solomon's life, there's so many layers to it. As we know, Solomon was a son of David. How many knows the story of, or how many do not know the story of Solomon? Nobody? Okay, good. Well, then you'll follow along. So Solomon, I don't know. I can't get Solomon. I can't understand him. So this has been a little bit tricky, and I've chewed on it, and I was up till midnight last night finishing up my notes, and I'm like listening to little podcasts about Solomon, all sorts of stuff, history stuff. I like to dig in. And so I'm like, God, which way do you need me to go with this? Because there's a lot of ways you can pick, and you can kind of go and kind of dissect it. So this is what I feel like God has laid for me to say today. So when this happened, I think I'm saying this right, Gibeah was the first capital of the kingdom of Israel during the reign of King Saul. It was located in what is now the northern part of Jerusalem. It was considered a high place of worship. Solomon traveled there to sacrifice to the Lord, taking over 1,000 animals to offer as a burnt offering to the Lord. While there, God spoke to Solomon a dream that forever changed his life. So at this time, I don't know if you guys know this, Solomon was around 20 years old. That's the age of my kids. In his dream in Gibeah, God extended a remarkable, unqualified offer to Solomon. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give thee." And that's found in 1 Kings 3 through 5. 6 simple words. Just ask anything you want. No limits or boundaries of any kind were presented. Whatever Solomon desired was his for the taking, and the one extending this offer was God himself. His resources are quite obviously unlimited. So can you even imagine if God came to you and said, ask whatever you want, I'll give it to you. So I did a test. I asked Garrison, because he's 20. He's not in a king position, but we were in the kitchen. I said, hey, question. If God came to you and said, ask anything and I'll give it to you, what would your response be? And he told me a response, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad response. But then I was like, that's really, and me and Rick both kind of were like, that's really what you would ask God for, like the one thing, like you could have anything? He's like, well, I didn't know you were talking about anything spiritual. It was funny. Not to put him on the spot, but a typical 20-year-old, right? So this is what they say, this is their, mentality on stuff. And again, it wasn't a bad deal, but it was just interesting. So I find that interesting that at 20, he asked for this particular thing, which was wisdom. And so we're going to kind of dive into this, but subject to the will of God and are asking with the right motives, we are given essentially the same promise regarding kingdom work. And whatsoever ye shall ask in my name, that will I do. And the Father may be glorified in the Son. If he shall ask anything in my name, I will do it. And that's in John 14, 13 through 14. That God is able to offer, or to God, a God able to do anything offers to do anything we legitimately need for the cause of Christ and the will of God. So if we're asking for the will of God, he's going to answer it. He will answer it. This word, you guys, I got notes everywhere. I'm not refined. I have notes everywhere, so I don't know where I'm going to be in here. This word from God for Solomon was the first time Solomon had heard directly from his Creator. And it might have been difficult for him to believe such a thing was happening to him. It would have been easy for him to discount it as his own imagination or having a byproduct of something he had eaten earlier that evening. Kind of look we talked about. He could have easily said, did I imagine that? This is just a weird dream. But Solomon actually embraced and received God's promise. As children of God, we must be willing to hear his voice, whether it comes through the scriptures, through our spiritual authority, or by the voice of the Spirit. God desires to communicate with us, but we must be willing. So more than a few times, the scriptures use the phrase, if any man have ears, let him hear. And you'll find that in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Revelation. So what was Solomon's response to God when he came to him and asked that? When God speaks, it is necessary for us to respond. God requires a proactive response to what he tells us. Solomon demonstrated this truth. As staggering as the offer was from God, he did not hesitate to make his request known. He responded in faith that if God had extended such a promise, he desired this newly crowned king to express his heart's desire. But what Solomon's heart desired is what is so noteworthy, and that's what we're talking about. He could have asked for anything that would have made his life better and more comfortable. He could have requested boundless wealth, military might, or a long life. Any of these would have improved the quality of his own life. But instead, this is what he said. And I'm going to, it's going to be 1 Kings 3, 6 through 9. And Solomon said, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to read you guys. And Solomon said, you have shown great mercy to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in truth, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. Now, O Lord, my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father, but I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in, and your servant is in the midst of your people, to whom you have chosen a great people, too numerous to be numbered or count. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to judge this great people of yours?" So what he did there, he recognized that his youth and his inexperience made him ill-equipped to lead a nation like Israel. The scope of challenges he would face were beyond him. The humility compelled him to make the following request. But how did he have the wisdom to ask for wisdom before he... Who guided Solomon's voice at this pivotal moment in history? And why did he first reply with... Why did he first reply with that? He talked about his father, right? He recognized the Lord's hand over his father's life. He knew he needed that same hand in his life. If his father, who was a man of God's, after a man of God's own heart, instructed him in a certain matter, he would obey. So Solomon actually used wisdom as a certain level of wisdom in that pivotal moment. Do you think his father talked to him? He did give him instruction before he passed. In Proverbs, you can find later on where he wrote, "For I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. He taught me also and said unto me, Wisdom is a principal thing, therefore get wisdom." When handed a blank check by God, Solomon, knowing he was not able to handle properly this request unassisted, reached back to a conversation that he had, or maybe multiple conversations he had with his father, and recalled David's emphasis on the importance of wisdom, and allowed that to be the instruction to direct his response at Gibeah to God. Never underestimate how godly instruction you give to your children will benefit them at critical moments in their future. So this is what David's charge to Solomon was in 1 King 1, 5:2. I'm going to go to that. This is what David said to his son. Now the days of David drew near that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, to keep his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies, as is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn, that the Lord may fulfill his word which he has spoken concerning me, saying, if your sons take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, he said, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. God made a promise to David. David instructed his son Solomon, and Solomon, that was his response to God. He knew the importance. He knew the instruction. But because Solomon's request is so selfless, God was most pleased. He promised Solomon that because he had not asked for wealth, military might, or long life, that God would add those blessings over him and above the wise heart granted in response to Solomon's specific request. Time would indeed demonstrate that God kept his word, as Solomon's wealth and kingdom took the breath away even from other world leaders. So let me pause to say this. To be a leader, you have to be submitted. He knew to be the leader that God called him to be, he would need to take the instruction of his father. That was his covering. That's what his instruction was. And so he went before and gave God that response. And I think that's why God was so pleased, honestly. I mean, it is a selfless thing to ask for, but if you go back, and for time's sake, I'm going to try to fit what I can in here, but if you go back, there was a lot of stuff that David did in his life. I mean, there was some stuff he did. But God, he repented, he moved on from that, and he was after God's own heart. He loved the Lord. Solomon saw those things in his father's life, so he knew that the instruction that he gave him was what he needed to do. And so he could have asked for those things. And a 20-year-old, I think they probably would ask, like, hey, let me be, let me have this, let me have that. But he knew he was going to lead, and he was the king. And so he knew if his father said to ask for this, you better ask for that. But while the promise of a wise heart was fulfilled unconditionally, at least one of those additional blessings included a caveat, and here it is. And if thou wilt walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. God tied the length of Solomon's days to his willingness to keep the commandments of God and to walk in covenant obedience to him. So if Solomon failed to do this, then God was no longer bound to that promise of length of days for him. We must always be aware of the conditions tied to many of God's promises. He is gracious and kind to extend to us exceeding great and precious promises, but in many cases, those promises have certain stipulations regarding our conduct. If we will observe his word, he will keep his word. In Proverbs 9 and 10, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Proverbs 10 and 27 says, the fear of the Lord prolongs days, but the years of the wicked shall be shortened. So the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Solomon's example should guide us in our response to God's promises. Our prayers must ever be humble kingdom prayers, so we may secure from God what is needed for our effective service to his kingdom. So it is evident that leading a nation as great and as vast as Israel would not be an easy task, and Solomon knew this, and the fact compelled his request for wisdom as Solomon settled into this new assignment. God's answer to that request was quickly put on display. So how many know the story? Everybody said they know Solomon. How everybody remember the test that God sent right after he granted him wisdom? This one was a little weird for me too. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm reading this and I'm like, how did he not know? But anyway, the situation was presented, seemed impossible one. We have two immoral ladies, two women that both had children. They were living in the same home, and one of them rolled over on their baby in the middle of the night and suffocated it. The baby died. That woman discovered her dead child in the middle of the night, got up, took her baby over to the other lady, swapped babies, put the living baby next to her and her dead baby next to the other woman. In the morning, they discovered it, went before the king, and this is what happened. Each claiming, they went before Solomon, and each were claiming that the child was theirs. So how would he possibly determine with certainty who was telling the truth or not? They're both standing there saying, this is my baby. So how is he going to determine that? Because there was no DNA test back then or anything that he could have done. So God's supernatural investment of wisdom into Solomon prompted him. He said, bring me a sword. Divide the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other. So I would think if he said that, would you not be sitting there going, what? You know what I mean? Like, why are we going to kill, why are we going to do this? I'm sure that's how the court was that day. They probably sat in horror over it. But the true mother of the child quickly pleaded that the child be spared and given to the other lady. The lying mom had no reaction, so it was immediately clear and present to all that was there. So if the real mother obviously is not going to say, yeah, cut it in half. Let's give both of them. It's all about the child. So she would give her child away just so the child could live. And he knew immediately that was the real mom. When this happened, Solomon's judgment in this situation demonstrated divine empowerment and word of his wise discernment quickly spreading among the subjects. And all of Israel heard of the judgment that the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was with him to do judgment. His profound wisdom solidified Solomon's standing as Israel's natural sovereign. No one could doubt that this man that was selected this man was God's selected leader for his people. So wisdom is a commodity of immeasurable worth. For wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things that may be desired are not to be compared to it. Given that wisdom is primarily a spiritual commodity, experience alone nor a book other than the Bible can provide it. God will not give us wisdom in the measure he did to Solomon, for he himself declared there would be another. There was never one before or after. There would never be a rival to Solomon. But God has given us a wonderful promise to be the source of wisdom, for him to be the source of wisdom in our lives. So if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given to him. And that's in James 1:5. Each of us should regularly and sincerely ask God for this wonderful gift. It will equip us to serve him effectively, just as it did Solomon. So I broke my toe 2 days ago. I don't know if I'm using wisdom. I have heels on today. We'll see. Side note, my brain went sideways for a minute. I'm starting to feel it a little bit. Lord, forgive me. Should have just wore those flats. But I believe the biggest thing that hinders our disobedience, hinders our obtaining true wisdom from God is our flesh. So how many times have we let our emotions or personal opinions control our words and actions? How many situations have we been in when our flesh became the source of our wisdom and not God? You're talking to somebody and, they're looking to you, for words of wisdom, something. And maybe you just shoot off at the mouth and say, well, this is what you should do. I mean, was that really wisdom, or was that you just stating your opinion? We have to be very careful, very, very careful about what we say, the words we say. They have weight. Our words have weight. And our actions, too. People are watching us. Was that wise for us to do this? I'm kind of honing in on these younger ones right now, and our adults as well. Adults, we have to watch ourselves, but I don't know. I think it's because Solomon's age with 20, it's really got me with this younger group right now. But we have to watch everything we say. My family tells me I'm very detailed, like too much detail. Like when I tell them something, they're like, land the plane. Like I have to tell the details. And I will go back and I'll say, nope, that wasn't it. It was this. And they're like, who cares? And I'm like, I care, because you know what? One day I have to stand before God and I have to give an account for every word that I said. And so it may not matter to you, but it matters to me. So, why am I crying? I was just going to have to cry today. But it does. And I really feel like we need to be very, very careful with our words. Very careful with our words and our actions. That's just honing in hard right now, but we do. We need to be very careful about what we say, what we speak, what we tell someone, and what our actions are. So, sorry, I can't see for a minute. So what happened to Solomon? What do you guys, does everybody remember what happened to him? Does everybody know the whole story about Solomon? Yeah, we're getting to that. We are getting to that. Lord. So let's talk about this. What are some of the things that Solomon actually did do with all that wisdom? He wrote some of the well-known books of the Bible, such as Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and Proverbs, which Song of Solomon, I feel like I got to pray after I read that. I can't read it. I cannot read Song of Solomon. I'm sorry, I can't. It's just too much. Books overflowing with insight, and some of those proverbs that were mentioned earlier. He built the first temple in Jerusalem. Took 7 years to complete. And if you kind of read your Bible, and I think it's like what did I write here? 1 Kings chapter 6 starts it, and then it kind of goes on. The construction and the materials are pretty amazing for this temple. But I can't get into all that. But let's backtrack for a second. David was going to build that temple, and he didn't get to. But Solomon did. So he used it for that, and there's a whole backstory with that, but that's just a side note you can kind of research on. He also led God's people according to God's will. But what was his downfall? So he has all this wisdom. He knows what to do with it. Doesn't it irritate you when somebody knows what to do and they don't do it? I can't even, when my kids know and I've told them something and they don't do it, I'm like, literally told you exactly what to do and you just didn't do it, and this is why it worked out this way. It's annoying. And I'm sure God feels that way with us too. I know he does. But what was Solomon's downfall? Like, what happened if you have all this wisdom, you have all this stuff and all these things? The man loved women. Do we have any little kids in here? He liked a lot of women. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. That's 1,000 wives. I don't even know. And as I'm like thinking about this, I'm like, I feel like that takes a lot of strength more than, it's not wise. But I feel like that takes a lot more strength. So maybe he was like really the strongest. I don't know. But I don't even know how he kept up with all that. I can't even, like, Rick, would you like 1,000 of me? I don't think you would. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying. Like, how do you even remember their names? It's too much. I'm like, why do you have all this? Like, that's pretty, I don't know, that's an addiction. That's what that is. That is an addiction. I'm sorry. But the Bible says that he loved many foreign women. Here's what's interesting about this. So it wasn't just women. This is where this comes into play here. He loved many foreign women that were from nations that the Lord told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. But what did he do? He went on with them anyway. His flesh and desires became stronger than his fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord was the beginning of wisdom, right? I feel like when you lose the fear of the Lord, you lose that wisdom too. Became stronger than the fear of the Lord, and in doing so, he was no longer operating in the spirit of what the Lord gave him. He was operating in flesh. I feel like he got a little cocky. I feel like he was like, I'm untouchable. That's kind of what I'm feeling here. Little young guy. Well, he was older by this point, but still, I feel like he thought he was untouchable. But he saw the things that happened to his father, or heard of the things that happened to his father. But his father repented and went on after that, and this kept going. But God can give you a gift to use for the purpose of kingdom advancement. But the moment we make it about us, we are no longer about our Father's business. And we're fools to think otherwise. Doing this, the Bible says, Solomon did evil. That is literally what the Bible says. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. So what happened? They absolutely led him astray, those women, those foreign women. He invited that in, though, and he allowed it. Nobody came to him and forced him. He allowed his, I'm saying it, addiction, his heart, literally. And here's a fun fact about harems. That's called a harem. I don't know if you guys know that or not. I like to look at history stuff. I want to get into everything. If I'm looking at something, I want to dig deep into this thing. A harem, does everybody know what a harem is, or you don't know what a harem is? So in Middle East, it's that way. Not here in America unless you're whatever. But anyway, so harem, why do you think they had, what was the purpose of having like a large harem? First of all, we know answer number one, testosterone. I'm just saying it. That's number one. Number two was political. This is interesting. So why does it say 1,000 wives, but then you got 700 wives and 300 concubines? What is the difference when they're all wives? Well, the 700 wives were actually of kingdom. They were already like of another kingdom. So they have that title. The concubines were still a wife, but they were not of royal descent or whatever. But the reason that these guys are like racking up their harem is because the likelihood of another kingdom coming to make war against you when their daughter and their grandchildren are in your palace is slim to none. They're not going to come for you. So it's a political move. And that's why they do that. But what new gods did he end up following? What did he allow? So he turned away from God, and there's these new gods that he's following now. And I'm like, who in the world did he follow here? Who did he allow to rule his heart and his mind? He followed, and I'm probably saying this wrong, Ashtoreth, which is a goddess of the Sidonians. That is a goddess of sea and sexual love and fertility. It is a female demon represented with a bull. Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. That is a god of child sacrifice. This is who he turned his heart. He turned his heart from God to worship these. Is it Chemosh? Chemosh. You guys figure that out. The detestable god of Moab and Moloch. This is a god who brought victory in battle, the god of war. Do you know that he actually ended up building on a hill east of Jerusalem? He actually ended up building on a high place these worship temples, areas, whatever you want to call them, to these gods. He allowed these wives to build, and he built them to go worship. And this is who he's worshiping now. How do you have the wisdom of God? You see the hand of God in all of this, and you let other voices and influence come for you and allow you astray from your earthly father and your spiritual father instruction. How do you do that? His flesh. So what happened, or like what was God's response to Solomon? The Bible says he had already warned Solomon when he appeared to him a second time. And this is in 1 Kings 9, 1 through 9. Give me just a second, sorry. Guys, I have the largest Bible ever up here. It's my study Bible. I love it, but it is a lot. It's 20 pounds. Give me 1 second. I'm so sorry. Okay. Sticking. This is what God had warned Solomon when he appeared to him a second time. And it came to pass when Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house and all of Solomon's desire which he wanted to do. And the Lord appeared to Solomon the second time as he appeared to him at Gibeon. And the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your supplication that you have made before me. I have consecrated this house which you have built to put my name there forever. And my eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. Now, if you walk before me as your father David walked, integrity of heart and in uprightness to do according to all that I have commanded you, and if you keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever. As I promised David your father, saying, you shall not fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. But if you or your sons at all turn away from following me and do not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given thee, and this house which I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight. Israel will be a proverb and a byword among all peoples, and as this house which is exalted, everyone who passes by it will be astonished, and they will hiss, and they will say, why has the Lord done thus to this land and to this house? Then they will answer, because they have forsook the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have embraced other gods and worshiped them and served them. Therefore, the Lord has brought all this calamity on them. He warned them. It's like he knew, right? Imagine God knowing this, right? He knew. He knew this. He gave him a warning. He warned him and said those words, and he still did this. I don't know. That's pretty direct. If God gives me a word, I'm that direct, I believe I'm going to listen to it. You know why he didn't? Because the fear of the Lord was gone from him. If he truly feared God, he would not have done that. He would never have done that. So Solomon allowed the voices and the influence of others to supersede his father's instructions. As I told you, his spiritual father and his earthly father, who shared the same instructions. As a result came his downfall. The wisdom did not keep him from playing the fool. It didn't. He had wisdom, but he was still a fool. That is a fool. That is a pure... You see why I get so aggravated at Solomon? I can't deal with him. Lord, all the wisdom in the world does not change our human nature. It doesn't. What rules our heart and our mind is going to rule us. If we don't have God in our heart, if we don't keep his commandments, if we don't keep the fear of the Lord in our heart, we have got to keep the fear of the Lord in our heart. I don't know how you don't. I don't know how you don't have the fear of God on you. This Bible here is not just stories. It's not just stories like, oh, we're just going to read a story and I don't know this guy, whatever. No, these stories here are to show us exactly its instruction. This is instruction. It shows us what to do and what's going to happen if you don't do it. He was not sugarcoating. God, this Bible doesn't sugarcoat anything. You see the flaws. That's why he talks about, if it's sugar-coated, they would have never mentioned he had 1,000 wives. That's crazy. You know what I mean? But it shows like these are the things that these people did. But then it never says in the Bible that Solomon repented. Never says in there he did. I don't know if he did. He never, it just doesn't say he does. I looked for it. Doesn't say he repented. So who knows? But what ended up happening from that, God got angry with Solomon. He got real angry with Solomon. Like real angry. And I'm going to tell you what ended up happening. Sorry. This is why I should have better notes. They're all over the place. Nobody would be able to read any of this stuff. I think it's on this one here. So let's see. I'm so sorry. I've got like a couple minutes, and I just need to tell you what happened to him. So the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned from the Lord, God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this, and have not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded you, I will surely tear down the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I found this so... Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David. Oh, man. Which I have chosen. He allowed him to have one tribe. He didn't do it in Solomon's lifetime. So Solomon just kept doing whatever he was doing. But it eventually did happen. It did happen. But if you think and you read and you study this, he referred back to David. He only had mercy because of David. his father. The instruction that David gave Solomon in the very beginning, and he listened, that's why the Lord was pleased. He knew. And if Solomon would have continued in his father's instruction, it wouldn't have gone down like this. It would not have gone down like this. But he chose not to. But God said, I will take it away, but for your father's sake, I'm going to leave one tribe. One tribe. And that's exactly what happened. Younger people, I know you think your parents are annoying, and we're not always right. We're not. But there is wisdom, and there's instruction that you need to listen to sometimes. You need to take that into account. I know that this day and age wants to, I'm seeing it. I know it personally, like with, just seeing stuff. You're an adult. You can make your own decision. Do it. You can do what you want. You don't need to go to your parents. You don't need to talk. You don't need instruction from them. You absolutely do. You absolutely do. I don't care who tells you that. That is a lie. You need your parents' covering. You need that instruction from them. You are not to be just out there just making decisions. Yes, you are young adults. You are. But there is godly counsel that you need to be seeking. You don't need to be just railing out there just making decisions on your own. And if anything, I think this story right here should show you that. Well, I'm over time. I knew I would be. Almost 2 minutes. So, love you guys. I'm excited about church today. Thanks.
It's so easy to love you. It's so easy to love you because you're wonderful. It's so easy to love you. It's so easy to love you. It's so easy to love you because you're wonderful. That's what the Father is. Say it. So easy to love you. So easy to love